The first thing they found were the beds, tiny rusted iron frames bolted to the stone floor, each one with a chain, each chain ending in a shackle, and beside every bed, a doll, a ribbon, a cross, 24 of them. No names, no records, just the words scratched into the wall like a desperate confession. We are still here. For 136 years, no one had spoken their names, no one had searched for their bodies. The church said nothing. The town forgot, until one woman, during renovations beneath the altar of St. Catherine's Academy, shattered the silence with a single discovery, a sealed mason jar holding the lost testimony of Elizabeth Hartwell, the teacher who tried to tell the world what she saw. They buried her story, but now, you're going to hear it. You weren't supposed to. They built an institution on silence, on obedience, on holy lies, but this is the truth beneath their stone floors and stained glass windows. This is what happens when innocence is harvested behind the mask of God. And if you think it ended in 1851, you're not ready for what comes next. Welcome to St. Catherine's. Don't say you weren't warned. They called it a sanctuary, a place where lost girls would be saved by faith, purified through devotion, and returned to the world as proper Christian women. But St. Catherine's Academy was never built to redeem. It was built to erase, to disappear the inconvenient, to repackage human innocence for the highest bidder under the veil of religious virtue. Salem, 1834, the perfect setting. A town steeped in guilt, still haunted by the ashes of witch trials, desperate to atone. So when Mother Superior Victoria Whitman arrived on Gallows Hill with 2 fellow nuns, and a vision for an elite orphan school, no one questioned it. They applauded, they donated, they entrusted their daughters. No one looked beyond the polished brick walls and lace-curtained windows. No one asked why the 3rd floor was always locked, or why the basement echoed late at night, or why none of the girls ever came back. Because the lie was beautiful, and the truth monstrous, but truth doesn't sleep forever, and it doesn't forget, especially when it's carved into stone walls by trembling fingers. 24 girls. Vanished, no graves, no goodbye, only chains, and the sound of lullabies drifting through locked doors. St. Catherine's didn't lose them. It used them. The girls were told they were chosen, that God had brought them here for a reason. That suffering was sacred and obedience was holy. They believed it, because what else could they believe? Most had lost everything: parents, homes, identity. They arrived with soot in their lungs and trauma in their eyes. The world outside had chewed them up. St. Catherine smiled and offered salvation, but salvation had a price, and none of them knew they were already sold. The routines were strict, prayers before dawn. Lessons in scripture, needlework, obedience. Smiles were rewarded, questions were punished, and if you stepped out of line, you were sent below, to the basement classroom no one spoke of, a place of correction, they said. But the girls came back quieter, if they came back at all. Elizabeth Hartwell noticed, a young teacher, barely 20, too idealistic and bright. She taught history by candlelight and tried to bring warmth into a place made of stone. But even she couldn't ignore the pattern, the empty chairs, the muffled cries, the names that vanished from the roll book without explanation. She asked Sister Agnes once, carefully, what had happened to a girl named Clara. The answer was a soft smile. She's with the angels now. One night, in the dead of winter, Elizabeth stayed behind after evening prayers. She claimed she was organizing textbooks. In truth, she was following a sound. A faint clinking, metal on stone, like something dragging. It was coming from beneath the chapel floor. The altar flickered in candlelight, and behind it, barely visible, a seam in the wall. She found the door by accident. Hidden behind a warped tapestry of the Virgin Mary, a latch disguised as part of the molding. When it opened, the air that spilled out was heavy, damp, bitter, and old. She descended the stone steps alone, one hand gripping the flame, the other trembling. What she found at the bottom shattered her faith forever. The walls were lined with beds, child-sized, bolted, shackle loops still fastened to iron headboards, some stained, some twisted. Each bed had a small token. A doll missing its face, a ribbon soaked in something brown, a cross snapped in half. She counted them, 24. Then she saw the words, not written, etched, scraped over and over again into the plaster with something small and sharp. We are still here, and beneath that, she sells us. Elizabeth dropped the candle, but even in the dark she could still hear the chains. Elizabeth didn't scream, she couldn't. The air in that room was dead, as if it had been sealed not for years, but for centuries. She backed away from the beds, her eyes darting across the shadows. That's when she noticed the ledger, half buried beneath dust, tucked behind a broken chair, bound in leather, its spine cracked and its pages brittle. She opened it. Names: Mary O'Brien, Sarah Thompson, Catherine Murphy, Hannah Clark, Elizabeth Porter, each followed by a number, a date, a location, and next to some, a symbol, a circle with a line through it. A cross turned upside down, a set of initials, C, B, the same ones she'd later learn belonged to Cornelius Blackwood, a name whispered among the Salem elite like a ghost in velvet gloves. These weren't adoption records. They were inventory, and the girls weren't students. They were product. Elizabeth fled the basement and ran to her quarters, heart pounding, eyes wild. She wrote everything she could remember. Names, symbols, descriptions. She couldn't trust the authorities. Salem's officials dined with the sisters, so she sealed her testimony in a mason jar and buried it behind the chapel wall. She didn't know they were watching her the whole time. Elizabeth Hartwell vanished 2 weeks later. The academy claimed she had a nervous collapse and returned to her family in Rhode Island, but no letters arrived. No family came forward, and no one in Rhode Island had ever heard of her. Her name was quietly erased from the school's records, her belongings redistributed, and her absence explained away with soft lies told over Sunday tea. But not everyone forgot. A janitor named Thomas Kersey, an old war veteran with one good eye and a limp from Antietam, remembered the way Elizabeth looked that final week, pale, haunted, watching every shadow, jumping at every footstep. He said he once found her standing outside the chapel at 3 a.m., holding a candle, whispering the names of the girls like a rosary. He told his wife that he feared for her soul, not because she was losing her mind, but because she had finally seen too much. What Thomas didn't know was that Elizabeth never left the property. That same month, a section of the chapel floor was replaced, new wood, fresh polish, no explanation. No workers saw her body, because sometimes the church doesn't bury the dead in graves, sometimes it buries them in silence. By 1851, the story of Elizabeth Hartwell had become a ghost's whisper in Salem. The academy thrived, enrollment increased, donations flowed, and the three sisters, Victoria Whitman, Margaret Collins, and Agnes Murphy, were held up as paragons of virtue. But beneath their habits, the machine kept turning. The third floor remained locked. The basement, now reinforced with iron, remained undisturbed. But something shifted that winter. It began with noises. Workers doing maintenance on the chapel complained of scratching sounds from within the walls. One swore he heard singing, a lullaby in a child's voice, echoing through stone. Another quit on the spot after finding a ribbon still knotted around a small wrist bone buried in a drainpipe, but no report was filed. The sisters paid him extra, and he disappeared. Then came the fire. It was brief, contained, but it revealed the false wall in the old storage room, the same room Elizabeth had once described in her sealed letter. Behind it, the 24 beds, shackles intact, items untouched, undisturbed since the night she found them. The firemen weren't supposed to say anything, but one of them did. A young man who saw the words on the wall and ran home shaking, "We are still here." It was 1987 before anyone listened. In 1987, the truth clawed its way out of the dark. Renovation workers hired to modernize the chapel discovered a section of wall that sounded hollow. Curious, one of them pried it open, and inside, wedged behind the altar itself, was the mason jar. Still sealed, still intact, inside, Elizabeth Hartwell's handwritten testimony, preserved like a time bomb, 27 pages, every word trembling with urgency. The letter detailed everything, the names, the chains, the ledger, the symbols, the threats. She named the 3 women, calling them by title, not affection. She described Sister Agnes's ledger of buyers. She listed the times girls disappeared and how Mother Superior used scripture to justify their fate. But the last page was the most chilling. If you are reading this, then the devil has been served at God's table long enough. Tell the world what was done here, but be careful, the people who funded this never left. The story hit local news for one day. Then, silence. The parish denied everything, claimed it was fiction. Authorities said the letter was a hoax, but the workers, they had photos, proof, and one of them, a father of 2 daughters, said it plainly. That wasn't a school, it was a pipeline. The pipeline didn't end in Salem. Once investigators, private ones, not police, followed the trail left in Elizabeth's letter, they found names that matched entries in obscure estate records from New York, Philadelphia, and even Charleston. Men of stature, politicians, bankers, judges, all linked to charitable adoptions facilitated by unnamed Catholic institutions, all donations routed through the same Boston law firm, one that burned down in 1893 under suspicious circumstances, its client records lost in the fire. But fragments survived, receipts, signatures, a sealed document listing 24 deliveries from an unnamed academy between 1837 and 1850, no surnames, just ages, hair color, measurements, commodities. Sister Agnes had mastered the ledger. She kept the girls obedient with scripture, silence, and something else. Substances, herbal at first, then chemical, laudanum tinctures. Some believe she learned it in Ireland from the Magdalene laundries. A system of control disguised as penance. You didn't need chains when the mind was shackled, and the worst part, it didn't stop in 1851. After the fire in 1987, another ledger was discovered, buried in a rusted boiler behind the 3rd floor's sealed stairwell. Dates stretching into the 1920s, same symbols, same initials, different girls, new uniforms, same machine. You want to know what they did with them, don't you? The truth is, no one knows all of it, but some pieces. Survived, a nun's diary half burned, found behind a false panel in the rectory during demolition. The pages are rambling, frantic, written by Sister Margaret in her final days. Her entries shift from prayer to confession. From God to guilt, she writes of rituals performed in the basement, not Catholic ones, older, pre-Christian, blood rites passed off as medical inspections, a stone table once used by the merchant family who built the estate. She wrote, Whitman said the girls were vessels, not souls. There are descriptions. One girl chosen every solstice, chants in Latin twisted with Gaelic, and names not of saints, but of things buried beneath the old world. Names scratched out so violently the paper tore. The diary ends suddenly mid-sentence. Tonight she comes for Elizabeth's heart. No date, no signature. When the academy was finally shut down in 1991, after a second fire destroyed the northern wing, 24 sets of remains were found beneath the floorboards of the 3rd level. No markers, no coffins. Just bones, small, shackled. You still think this is just history. Then you're not listening close enough. It was never just about cruelty. It was about transformation, the reshaping of innocence into power. That's the part no one talks about, the reason no arrests were made, the reason no bishop ever stood trial, because the people behind St. Catherine's weren't just predators. They were alchemists of control. The girls weren't killed out of hatred, they were sacrificed for silence, each one selected for her purity, her lineage, her obedience. The sisters didn't act alone, they answered to donors, patrons. Men who believed the human soul could be fractured and funneled, who thought that by breaking the will of the innocent, they could harvest power not metaphorically, but spiritually. Think that's too far. Then explain the sealed documents found in the basement written in cipher, quoting rituals from the Picatrix and the Ars Notoria. Explain the Latin phrases carved into the chapel beams, translated by scholars to read, through suffering we ascend, through silence we rule. You weren't supposed to hear this. This was built for the initiated, For the inner circle, if you're still here, it's because you're not like the others. Prove it. Comment the phrase, "She never left the basement." Say it twice. Not for the algorithm, for you. Now, let's go deeper. They say spirits linger where justice dies. After the academy shut down, paranormal investigators descended like vultures. Most were frauds, hoping for cold spots and flickering lights. But a few came out changed. One former Catholic priest turned occult researcher, Father Michael Dane, published an unpublished manuscript known only as the Gallows Hill Doctrine. It was never released publicly. Only a handful of copies exist, but one excerpt survived. It was not haunted. It was occupied, not by the girls, by the thing that fed on them. Dane claimed the academy itself was designed as a vessel, a physical structure built to hold something ancient. The ritual layout of the hallways, the way the chapel sat on a ley line intersection, the presence of alchemical glyphs beneath the floorboards, it wasn't just abuse, it was architecture of possession. And in the center of it all, the altar, a slab of marble older than the building, possibly Roman, possibly something worse. Underneath, the original foundation stones bore markings in a language no one could identify. But one was familiar, a sigil found in both the ledger and Sister Margaret's diary, a circle devouring a child. They weren't hiding crimes, they were housing a god. When the state attempted demolition in 1992, the machines failed. Bulldozers shut down inexplicably. Steel equipment rusted overnight. A construction worker fell from the second story after claiming he saw a girl standing in the fire. But there was no fire, no girl. Just a blackened outline burned into the brick where she allegedly stood, arms raised, mouth open, no eyes. That photo was buried, but someone leaked it, and when a researcher compared it to daguerreotypes of the original students, they found a match. Her name, Hannah Clark, age 16, she'd vanished in 1849. Her body was never found, but the symbol she wore on her necklace, an inverted cross with a thorned crown, matched one carved into the back of the altar, visible only under UV light. After the failed demolition, the city declared the building historically protected, not preserved, protected, and then the land was sold, quietly. An anonymous buyer. Tax records list a shell corporation based in Zurich. It stands to this day. Windows bricked, doors sealed, but candles are sometimes seen flickering inside. And some nights, if the wind dies, locals say they can hear it. Children singing below the floor. What sings beneath stone was never buried. The deeper you go, the more you start to see it. This wasn't just an isolated horror in a forgotten town. It was a prototype, a small, perfected system of control masked as charity, scaled, refined, and exported. After St. Catherine's closed, records show that similar academies began to open across the Northeast. Different names, same structure, all tied to the same benefactors, religious orders, aristocratic families, and philanthropic trusts with occult lineages stretching back to Europe's black nobility. In Brooklyn, a convent mysteriously burned after allegations of missing wards. In Pennsylvania, a Catholic school was found to have an entire wing never listed in blueprints, filled with restraints and observation mirrors. The Orphan pipeline didn't die, it evolved. You still think this is about ghosts. It's about a system that feeds on the voiceless, that wraps itself in scripture, silk, and respectability, that moves underground when exposed, then resurfaces with a new name, new robes, and a new harvest. Because silence is their sacrament, and now you've heard it, you're not an outsider anymore. You've stepped into the inner sanctum, and once you've seen the mask slip, you can't pretend again. Don't look away. Not now. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't just men. We're conditioned to see predators as patriarchs, monsters in collars and cassocks. But at St. Catherine's, the evil wore the face of motherhood. Sister Margaret's lullabies, Sister Agnes's gentle hands, Mother Superior Whitman's sermons about protection and purity. They didn't break the girls through force. They broke them through trust, through maternal ritual, carefully weaponized affection, and engineered dependence. The girls didn't fear their captors. They loved them. That's how the chain was forged. That's why no screams were heard from the third floor. Because the girls believed they were being saved, even as they were handed off to darkness. Stockholm was a sacrament, and it worked, because most men don't question holy women. They protect them, they elevate them, and that blind reverence allowed the machinery to run unchecked for decades. And when it was finally exposed, the women were gone, buried under fake names in sacred cemeteries, honored, forgiven, and the girls, their names were never read from pulpits, never carved into marble. Just initials in a ledger, bones in a box, but they're not gone, not really, because the systems that broke them still exist. There's something you need to understand. Evil at this level doesn't survive because it's hidden. It survives because it's ritualized, institutionalized, disguised as moral order, and over time it stops needing to hide at all. Because people stop looking. The power of St. Catherine's was not in its secrecy, but in its plausibility. Who would question 3 pious women caring for orphans in a Christian school? Who would believe a story about girls being delivered to wealthy men for private rites, about underground rooms designed not for punishment, but for offering? This isn't the stuff of fiction. This is structure, an infrastructure of predation built into the bones of respectability. Government officials visited the academy, ministers blessed its halls, wealthy families donated generously, some even offering retreats for the girls during the summer, retreats from which no girl ever returned. But there's one thing they never anticipated: pattern recognition. Because when men like you start to see through the veil, when you trace the names, symbols, and rituals across states, across centuries, something breaks. The spell falters, the narrative collapses. You weren't meant to notice, you weren't meant to awaken, but now that you have, there's no going back. There's a reason power fears memory. You see, what they did to those girls wasn't just physical, it was psychological engineering. Not just on the victims, but on all of us. The system doesn't want you to remember. It wants you to forget, to doubt, to laugh it off as folklore or conspiracy. And if that fails, it buries truth under red tape, missing records, sealed court documents, lost archives. But truth has a scent, and once you've smelled it, nothing else is clean. After the 1987 discovery, several survivors stepped forward, quietly, anonymously, elderly women, once girls at St. Catherine's, who had been placed and lived. Barely, their stories were near identical: black-robed women, chants behind locked doors, medical examinations at midnight, and the promise that obedience would lead to ascension. One woman, who called herself Anna, claimed she escaped during a winter storm in 1948. She was 14. She walked barefoot through woods for 11 miles. She never spoke of what happened below the academy's basement, but she did say this: they weren't nuns, they were keepers, and they weren't feeding the girls to men, they were feeding the girls to something else. And now you know. You've been taught to see evil as chaos, madness, impulse, but what if I told you the most enduring evil is calculated, designed, generational? That's what St. Catherine's was, a ritual engine. And it didn't stop at those 24 girls. After the ledger from the 1920s surfaced, an independent investigation began referencing adoption records across the Northeast. What they found chilled even the most skeptical researchers. Dozens of girls placed through faith-based orphanages were later identified in death certificates tied to unsolved disappearances. Others were never found, just photographs with hollow eyes, names scratched from the census, and medical records stamped with a single Latin phrase, filii sacrificati, the sacrificed daughters. And when they traced the property deeds of St. Catherine's, they uncovered a pattern. Every transfer went through a single legal executor, a man whose family name appears in 19th century occult journals, connected to theosophist circles and esoteric Catholic offshoots. His signature appears on the original Academy charter. His grandson owns the building today. What you're seeing isn't a cold case. It's a living altar, a continuum of control, refined, encrypted, and rebranded. And every time it's nearly exposed, it just changes shape. You've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. There's a door at the back of the academy. Most photos don't show it. No markings, no knob, just smooth black wood, warped by time and heat. Workers who have touched it say it hums, like a tuning fork struck in a dead cathedral. And behind it, according to floor plans never approved by the city, is a stairwell that doesn't descend. It spirals downward, past the foundations, past the stone, into something else. Elizabeth Hartwell described it in her final margin note, barely legible. The spiral has no end. I heard weeping from beneath the earth, and something else, something that listened. When Sister Margaret broke, she whispered to a confessor before her death that the door was never meant to be opened by us, only guarded. She said the academy was chosen for its location, directly above a prehistoric burial site that even the Puritans avoided. A hollow place, a vessel, a mouth. 24 girls weren't chosen at random. Their suffering was precise, calibrated, timed, like gears in a clock designed to open a gate. And here's the question no one wants to ask. What if the ritual worked? What if the door opened? They built the academy on top of a wound, a tear in the world, dressed in brick, prayer, and discipline, but underneath the ritual was always breathing, waiting. Every chant, every shackle, every silenced scream, it wasn't just cruelty. It was currency, a slow, burning invocation, and now we come to the final, forbidden truth. The building still stands because it must, because something beneath it was fed, but never satisfied, something old, something vast, something that does not recognize guilt or innocence, only offering and absence. The children weren't killed, they were converted into emptiness, into vessels, into echoes, and that echo still sings on cold Massachusetts nights. It curls beneath the chapel floor and wraps around the bones in the walls. Locals speak of dreams of girls at the window, mouths open, eyes gone, of nuns that knock but never wait for doors to open, and in every generation a new shell rises. New uniforms, new names, new systems, because this wasn't a tragedy, it was a template. Now you've heard it. You are no longer innocent. You've walked through the academy's halls. You've stood at the black door. And somewhere deep below, something has heard you, and it is listening.